I want you to imagine, for just a second, spending 6,000 hours inside a world that doesn't actually exist.
I mean, that's almost 272 full consecutive days.
Right. Exactly. Imagine just sitting in the dark, illuminated only by the glow of a CRT monitor. You are dedicating years of your actual finite human life to a digital landscape.
While the real world is just spinning on completely without you.
Yeah, and on paper, it sounds like the ultimate cautionary tale, like the absolute definition of wasted time.
Oh, absolutely. The classic failure to launch.
But then, imagine realizing that this exact period of quote-unquote wasted time was actually a masterclass.
A completely hidden, brutal education.
Yes. One that would eventually lead to you building digital worlds inhabited by millions and millions of people.
It's just the ultimate pivot, taking what society universally views as a complete escape from reality and turning it into this foundational blueprint for reality-shaping success.
It really forces us to redefine what we even consider productive time. So, welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are exploring the hidden psychology of why things are fundamentally fun, how digital worlds manipulate our deepest behaviors, and honestly, the devastating, crushing reality of creative failure.
It is a wild ride.
It really is. To do that, we're analyzing a massive stack of notes and transcripts surrounding one specific person, Jeff Kaplan.
And if you follow the gaming industry, you know exactly who that is.
Oh yeah, he is the legendary game designer behind World of Warcraft and Overwatch.
Two absolute titans of the industry.
And our sources today primarily revolve around his deeply revealing, highly introspective conversation on the Lex Fridman podcast.
It's such a great source because he holds nothing back.
He really doesn't.
Yeah.
We're going to look at how a guy who fails spectacularly at everything he originally tried to do ended up becoming the architect of the world so many of us have lived in.
And to understand the architects, we really have to understand the foundation.
Right.
Before he was this game designer managing billion-dollar intellectual properties, he was just a kid utterly obsessed with the raw mechanics of play.
So let's wind the clock back a bit. We're talking early 80s in Southern California.
The absolute golden era of the coin-op arcade.
Exactly. He's a kid riding his BMX bike to pizza parlors, liquor stores, just to stand in front of these massive glowing wooden cabinets.
Oh, I miss those.
Right, and he actually talks about his Uncle Ronnie feeding him quarters to play Pac-Man.
And the funny thing is, his uncle was doing that specifically because he was too intimidated by the machine to play it himself.
Which is such a telling detail about that era.
It really is. I mean, video games were entirely new interactive paradigms.
Yeah.
For an adult in the early 80s, a machine that responded to your physical inputs felt alien. It was almost daunting.
But for a kid, pure magic.
Exactly. You had asteroids in hotel lobbies, Pong in living rooms.
But the real paradigm shift for Kaplan wasn't actually the arcade. It was the personal computer.
Right, because his parents bought an IBM TC that ran on DOS.
Which he was incredibly disappointed by at first.
Oh, totally. Because as a kid, you want what the cool kids have, right?
Yeah, the Amigas or the Commodore 64s with the better graphics.
But then his mom brought home a game called Zork.
And this just fundamentally rewired his brain.
It is so vital to unpack how Zork functioned because, honestly, it is the bedrock of his entire design philosophy.
For those who don't know, Zork was a text-based adventure created by Infocom.
Meaning there were zero graphics?
None. No pixels, no sprites, no animations.
The screen was literally just a blinking text prompt.
It would just describe a room. Like, it would say, you are standing in an open field west of a White House.
And you, the player, had to actually type out commands.
Right, like go west or open mailbox.
So it's essentially an interactive novel.
Exactly. But the mechanism at play here is deeply cognitive.
Yeah, by forcing the player to visualize the White House, the field, the monsters, the game leverages the most powerful rendering engine in existence.
Human imagination.
Precisely. As the sources point out, it relies on the exact same psychological mechanism that makes people always say, the book was better than the movie.
Oh, that's such a good point. Because when you read a book, your brain perfectly tailors everything, the visuals, the lighting, the tone.
It customizes it to your specific ideal preferences.
So Zork taught him that the most immersive worlds aren't necessarily the ones with the best graphics.
Right. They are the ones that force the user to co-create the experience in their own mind.
And from Zork, he graduates to a game called Ultima 2, created by the legendary Richard Garriott.
Now suddenly there are graphics.
But more importantly, There is a simulated society.
Yeah, Garriott famously inserted himself into the game as a character named Lord British.
And you weren't just following a linear story anymore.
No, I mean, you could fight demons, sure. But if you wanted to, you could just try to rob the local merchants.
Or you could even try to assassinate Lord British himself.
Which is wild. It was pure, unadulterated world building.
It introduced this whole concept of player agency.
Exactly. The game world existed regardless of what you did, but it reacted dynamically to your choices.
So these early games really planted a very specific seed in his mind, this deep desire to transport people.
But the fascinating thing is, he didn't look at Ultima and think, I want to code video games.
Right, because coding was highly technical back then.
And game design wasn't a standard formalized career path yet. You couldn't just go get a degree in level design.
So he looked at the feeling of being transported and thought, I want to be a writer.
And he goes all in on this.
He really does. He moves across the country, gets a master's degree in creative writing from New York University.
And he's idolizing the heavyweights.
Oh, yeah. Jack Kerouac, Ernest Hemingway, J.D. Salinger, Charles Bukowski, George Orwell.
He wants to trigger the exact same profound emotional resonance that those authors triggered in him.
We really have to pause and acknowledge the sheer audacity of that, the vulnerability required to pursue it.
Oh, it's immense. To read 1984 or The Catcher in the Rye and actively think to yourself, I'm going to sit down at a typewriter and create the next one of those.
Right. It requires a massive ego, but also a willingness to stand completely naked in front of the world and just invite its judgment.
But the judgment he got was arguably worse than criticism.
Yeah. It was just deafening silence and relentless rejection.
And then he makes this classic, almost cinematic life mistake.
Oh, this part hurts to read. He leaves his highly supportive, tight-knit group of writer friends in New York.
And he moves all the way back to California for a girl.
A relationship that, predictably and tragically, dissolved almost the exact moment he unpacked his bags.
Literally within 2 months, it's over.
So now he is entirely isolated in California.
He takes a job doing research for his father's executive recruiting company.
And he figures out this brutal schedule. He realizes if he calls East Coast clients at 5:00 a.m. Pacific time, he can finish his shift by the early afternoon.
Which frees up the rest of his day.
So he forces himself into this intense, self-imposed isolation.
He sits in a room for 8 solid hours a day, every single day, just writing.
His only companion is his Jack Russell Terrier.
Who he literally named Jack after Jack Kerouac.
Of course he did. It paints this romantic, tortured artist picture.
It does, but the day-to-day reality of this in the late 90s was physically and financially grueling.
Right, because submitting a short story wasn't just clicking a button on a website or sending an email.
No, you had to print physical manuscripts.
You had to buy large envelopes.
You had to pay for postage to send it out to literary magazines like the Paris Review or the New Yorker.
And crucially, you had to include a SASE, a self-addressed stamped envelope.
Meaning you were literally paying out of your own pocket just to give the editor the physical means to mail you a rejection letter.
He was financially subsidizing his own heartbreak.
And in a single year, he received over 170 of these physical rejection letters.
170. I cannot even imagine.
The psychological toll of that is fascinating, though. Because when you are drowning in rejection, the human brain desperately clings to any anomaly.
Right, like if an assistant editor scrawled the words, "shows promise," in the margin of a standard rejection slip.
He would frame that as a massive victory. It would fuel him for another month.
It is essentially a variable ratio reinforcement schedule.
Exactly. It's the exact same psychological hook used in slot machines.
You pull the lever 170 times and get nothing.
But that one tiny scrap of validation keeps you at the machine.
But eventually, the house always wins.
Yeah. The sheer crushing volume of rejection completely broke him.
He spiraled into a deep, dark depression.
He developed a severe dependency on alcohol.
He talks about going to the liquor store, buying whole bottles of old granddad whiskey, and drinking them entirely alone in his apartment.
There's this harrowing image in the sources.
Yeah, him sitting on his floor, drinking a bottle of whiskey, watching the Academy Awards on television.
And just feeling utterly annihilated by the contrast.
Seeing these polished, successful, celebrated artists on screen.
While he is sitting in the dark, surrounded by failure.
It escalated to a terrifying point. He sought therapy. He tried various antidepressants.
But he hated the chemical fog they put him in. He felt they blunted the very emotions he needed to write.
The depression became so severe, and the people around him became so genuinely terrified for his safety that he underwent ECT.
Electroconvulsive therapy, commonly known as shock therapy.
It was the absolute last resort measure to essentially reboot his brain and break the cycle of severe clinical depression.
Which leads to one of the most drastic, visceral turning points I've ever heard.
Yeah, we can call it the dumpster moment.
He survives the ECT, he gets back to his apartment, and he looks at his life's work.
He had accumulated roughly 20 volumes of handwritten journals, ideas, character sketches, notes on every book he had ever read.
Alongside massive stacks of typed, rejected manuscripts.
And he gathers every single piece of paper, walks out to a literal dumpster behind his building, and throws it all away.
He physically discarded his entire identity.
Wait, I really want to dissect this, because every motivational speaker, every sports coach, every movie we've ever watched preaches the exact opposite.
Right. The universal mantra of our society is never give up.
Persistence is framed as the ultimate virtue. So is there a psychological case where giving up is actually a superpower?
Oh, absolutely. And it hinges on the critical distinction between an identity and an action.
Okay, unpack that.
The sources highlight a profound revelation he had after this event. You must focus on what you want to do, not what you want to be.
Right.
From childhood, society drills the question into us, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Do you want to be an author? An astronaut?
A CEO.
Exactly. That framing obsesses over the noun, the title, the social status of the role.
You get caught up in the aesthetics of the job. You buy the typewriter, you drink the whiskey, you name the dog Kerouac.
You are cosplaying as the writer.
Yeah. You fall in love with the idea of being perceived as a genius by others. But the reality of doing the work, sitting in a silent room, agonizing over syntax for 8 hours a day, was making him miserable.
When he threw those journals into the dumpster, he said it was like a boxer's trainer throwing in the towel.
It was an act of profound mercy.
If he kept the manuscripts in a desk drawer, the temptation to resubmit them, to chase that identity, would always be there.
By destroying them, he severed the tether. He gave up on being a writer, which created a massive vacuum in his life.
And that vacuum forced him to discover what he actually enjoyed doing with his time when absolutely no one was watching.
And what he enjoyed doing, it turned out, was escaping into a completely different reality.
Having effectively deleted his real-world ambitions, he threw himself entirely into a digital universe.
And the incredible irony is that by trying to run away from his life, he accidentally auditioned for his dream job.
The year is 1999, and a game called EverQuest launches.
This is the primordial soup of the modern MMORPG, the massively multiplayer online role-playing game.
It was a fully 3D, sprawling fantasy world called Norath, where thousands of people could exist simultaneously.
He had a friend named Vic who badgered him into trying it.
And the moment he logged in and created a halfling rogue character, it consumed him entirely.
I mean, you mentioned the 6,000 hours earlier.
That is not an exaggeration. When he finally quit the game 3 years later, he typed a specific command into the chat interface.
The /played command.
Right, which calculates your exact time logged into the server. The screen told him he had been logged in for 272 full days.
And while he freely admits that a significant portion of that was an unhealthy, desperate escapism from the wreckage of his real life,
we cannot dismiss what he was actually doing during those 6,000 hours.
No, because he wasn't just mindlessly pressing buttons.
He was undergoing an accidental, highly intensive masterclass in behavioral psychology and organizational leadership.
Which is wild to think about.
So, explain how playing an elf on a computer translates to leadership. Because to an outsider, that sounds completely ridiculous.
Well, it comes down to the brutal design mechanics of early MMOs. In EverQuest, if you wanted to experience the highest tier of the game, like defeating the massive fire dragon Lord Nagaffin or the frost dragon Lady Vox,
You could not do it alone.
not a chance. The game mathematically required a highly coordinated team of up to 72 individual players working in perfect synchronization.
And to achieve that, players formed complex social hierarchies called guilds.
And Jeff didn't just join any guild.
On his specific server, called the Nameless, there was an Uber guild, the most elite, hardcore group of players called Legacy of Steel.
He joins them, and through a combination of sheer dedication and competence, he eventually rises to become the leader of this massive organization.
Which is arguably more difficult than managing a department in a real-world corporation.
Oh, completely. Think about the parameters here. You are dealing with 70 through 100 anonymous people on the internet in the late 90s.
You are managing people who are dealing with their own real-life depression, people who are fiercely competitive, and people who are incredibly greedy for rare digital loot.
And you have zero financial leverage over them. You can't pay them a salary or fire them from their livelihood.
You have to compel them to show up at a specific time, follow complex tactical instructions, and maintain discipline.
Using nothing but pure soft skills, charisma, and conflict resolution.
It's pure psychology. The early days of MMOs were basically unregulated behavioral experiments.
Oh, look at the games that came just before this, like Ultima Online.
Right. It was essentially an experiment in human cruelty.
People figured out that you could level up a poison skill, apply that poison to an apple, drop the apple on a road, and hide in the bushes.
A player would ride by on their horse, the horse would automatically eat the apple, the horse would die, the player would be stranded.
And you would jump out of the bushes, murder the player, and steal months of their hard-earned equipment.
It was a sociopathic Wild West.
And that context makes the cooperation in EverQuest so vital. The game forced you to rely on others.
And that forced reliance sets the stage for one of the most incredible, fateful networking moments in the history of the tech industry.
It revolves around a player and a character named Barfa.
Okay, I love this story. So, Jeff is leading his guild through a terrifying new dungeon called The Hole.
It is notoriously difficult.
A battle goes completely sideways, and the guild has to abort. They are running for their lives to the exit.
Everyone manages to escape the dungeon, except for Barfa.
Barfa is playing a giant troll warrior, and his character model is physically too large to fit through the geometry of the escape tunnel.
He is trapped in the depths of this dungeon, surrounded by monsters that are going to kill him.
Which in EverQuest meant losing a massive amount of experience points and potentially all your gear.
Now, Jeff is playing a rogue. His character has the ability to turn invisible, meaning he is perfectly safe.
He can easily walk out.
But Jeff happens to possess an incredibly rare, incredibly expensive in-game item, a teleportation potion.
And without a second thought, Jeff breaks his invisibility, runs back into the swarm of monsters, trades this massively valuable potion to Barfa, and tells him to use it.
Barfa teleports to safety, and Jeff saves the day.
Now, why does saving a random troll in a video game matter?
Because of who was watching behind the scenes.
Concurrent to all this, Jeff had been tinkering with level design.
Games at the time, like Half-Life or Duke Nukem, often shipped with the actual software tools the developers used to build the game.
Right, so Jeff taught himself how to use these tools and built a custom multiplayer map for Half-Life.
He casually mentioned this in the guild chat to his former guild leader, a player named Ariel.
Ariel, who played a blonde female wood elf.
Ariel tells Jeff, hey, you should mail that level to this address in Irvine, California. I'd love to play it.
Keep in mind, this is 1999. There is no high-speed broadband or cloud storage.
You couldn't just email a massive 3D map file.
Jeff had to burn the files onto a physical CD-ROM, put it in a bubble mailer, and take it to the post office.
He sends it off. A few days later, Ariel sends him a message and says, hey, by the way, my real name isn't Ariel. My name is Rob Pardo, and I am a game designer at Blizzard Entertainment.
Ariel the Wood Elf is actually Rob Pardo, the lead designer of Warcraft 3.
Rob says, hey, we are located in Irvine. Why don't you come down and have lunch with some of the guild members?
Jeff agrees, though he admits he was terrified it might be some elaborate internet scam where he was going to get murdered in a parking lot.
But he goes to this lunch, and his mind is completely blown.
He sits down at the table and realizes that half of his hardcore trash-talking guildmates are actually legendary, industry-defining developers at Blizzard.
He is sitting across from the guys who literally built StarCraft and Warcraft.
But the best part, the absolute pinnacle of this realization, happens at a subsequent lunch.
Rob Pardo turns to Jeff and says, hey, I want to introduce you to the guy who plays Barfa.
And he points to a man named Alan Adam.
Alan Adam was not just a developer. He was the founder and chairman of Blizzard Entertainment.
The guy whose troll character Jeff saved with an expensive potion was the CEO of the company.
It is the most absurd networking story.
It's like jumping on a grenade for a random guy in a weekend laser tag match and finding out he's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company.
And he wants to hire you because he was so impressed by how you communicated under fire?
It is deeply funny, but we have to analyze what this actually says about the corporate culture at early Blizzard.
It was an incredibly rare, perfectly flat hierarchy. You have the CEO of a massive company logging into a game as an anonymous troll,
Subordinating himself to a player, taking orders from that player.
and humbly accepting help when he made a mistake. It was a pure meritocracy of ideas.
In that guild, your job title didn't matter. If you understood the mechanics of the game better than anyone else, you were given the microphone.
And because they respected his leadership in the game, they trusted his mind.
Rob Pardo tells Jeff to check the Blizzard Careers website.
There's a brand new posting for a role called Associate Quest Designer on a secret, unannounced project called World of Warcraft.
And if you look at the job description, one of the bullet points specifically lists degree in creative writing or English strongly preferred.
They essentially wrote the job requisition specifically to justify hiring him.
But to Blizzard's credit, they didn't just hand him a badge. They put him through a grueling 6-month interview process.
At that time, Blizzard was incredibly insular. They only hired game designers from within their own ranks.
Usually promoting people from quality assurance or technical support who had proven they understood the Blizzard way.
Hiring a completely untested outsider directly into a design role was practically unheard of.
The interview process sounds wild, too. He has a session with Chris Metzen, the legendary creative director who essentially wrote the Bible for the Warcraft universe.
Jeff goes in expecting a stiff, corporate interview.
Instead, Metzen immediately says, "Hang on, I need to go buy cigarettes," drags Jeff to a convenience store, drops an F-bomb in every sentence.
And completely shatters Jeff's concept of what a corporate environment looks like.
Finally, after months of this, the founders take him to a Jack-in-the-Box fast food restaurant attached to an RSEO gas station.
And over burgers, they offer him the job for $35,000 a year.
And he accepts. The profound poetry of this moment cannot be overstated.
The man who was so destroyed by literary rejection that he threw his entire writing career into a literal dumpster
Is now hired to write the narrative quests for what will become the most financially successful and culturally impactful digital world in human history.
But getting the job is really only the prologue, because the moment he steps into the building, he realizes he has been assigned to a sinking ship.
Right. At Blizzard's Irvine campus, the development floor was divided into 2 distinct factions.
You had Team 1. Team 1 was the pantheon of gods.
They were the developers who had created StarCraft and the Warcraft real-time strategy games.
They printed money. They were flawless.
And then you had Team 2.
Yeah.
Jeff explicitly refers to them as the Bad News Bears.
Team 2 was the group tasked with building World of Warcraft.
And historically, Blizzard had a terrible track record of trying to spin up secondary teams.
They had previously attempted to make a sci-fi game called Nomad that completely fell apart.
Now, they were trying to build a massive MMO, but they had absolutely no idea how to do it.
They were trying to modify a graphics engine originally built for Quake.
Which is a fast-paced corridor shooter.
Exactly. And they're trying to make it handle massive outdoor landscapes with thousands of players.
They were hiring level designers straight out of the first-person shooter community.
Guys who knew how to make a tight arena for a deathmatch and telling them to build sprawling fantasy continents.
It was a technological and organizational nightmare.
But what they lacked in MMO experience, they made up for in sheer psychotic dedication.
Jeff talks about the crunch culture, the normalized practice of working extreme overtime.
And he makes a point to say that management wasn't walking around with a whip, forcing them to stay.
They stayed because they were obsessed with solving the puzzle.
He recounts a specific bug hunting session that is hard to even fathom.
A programmer named John Cash was trying to fix a rare crash that occurred during the cinematic intro for the Undead race.
Cash needed someone to replicate the crash so he could capture the data.
So Jeff sat at a desk and watched the exact same cinematic loop over and over again for 30 continuous hours.
Just think about the physical toll of that. 30 straight hours of staring at a monitor, waiting for a program to break.
He watched the sun go down, watched his coworkers go home to sleep, watched them come back in the next morning.
And he was still sitting in the exact same chair with bloodshot eyes.
But that shared suffering bonds a team.
And more importantly, their collective ignorance of how MMOs were quote-unquote supposed to be made actually became their greatest competitive advantage.
If they had hired a team of EverQuest veterans, they would have just built EverQuest 2.
Instead, they completely dismantled and revolutionized the core loop of the genre.
Let's dissect the mechanics of leveling up.
In early MMOs, progression was fundamentally static. If you wanted to gain experience points, you found a small patch of land where monsters spawned rapidly.
Say, a goblin camp.
You and your group would stand in that exact spot and you would kill a goblin.
You'd wait 3 minutes for it to respawn and you would kill it again.
You would do this for 6 hours straight. It was called camping. It was mind-numbingly repetitive.
But Alan Adam, the CEO, hated that. He wanted the game to feel like an adventure.
So he hired Jeff and a designer named Pat Nagel to be quest designers.
Initially, Jeff thought their job was just to write a little story blurb that gave players an excuse to go find a good camping spot.
They sit down with Chris Metzen, who is drawing these incredibly rich, massive continents on a whiteboard.
Elwyn Forest, Westfall, Duskwood.
Jeff and Pat write a handful of quests to guide players through the human starting zone.
They set up an internal playtest with developers who had primarily played shooters and didn't know the rules of MMOs.
After an hour of playing, the playtesters come back to Jeff and complain, "That was terrible, we ran out of quests."
Jeff and Pat are completely confused. They say, "What do you mean you ran out? The quests were just to show you where the monsters are. Now you just stay there and kill them until you level up."
And the playtesters look at them and say, "No, we expect the quests to take us all the way to max level."
This was a terrifying, paradigm-shifting realization.
It did the math and realized that if players expected quests to carry them through the entire game, they didn't need 50 quests.
They needed thousands. They needed an exponential increase in narrative content.
And this panic leads to what I think is the most profound psychological insight in the entire transcript.
It's a concept called designing along the path of least resistance.
This concept applies far beyond video games. It is the cornerstone of all user experience and behavioral design.
Game designers understand a fundamental truth about human nature. We are inherently efficient, which is a polite way of saying we are inherently lazy.
A player will always, inevitably, seek out the absolute fastest, most mathematically efficient route to gain power and progress.
Even if that route is incredibly boring.
Exactly. If the absolute fastest way to reach level 60 is to stand in a dark cave and press the spacebar every 4 seconds to kill a rat.
Players will stand in the cave, press the spacebar for 3 weeks, and then go onto the internet and aggressively complain that the game is boring.
Precisely. They optimize the fun out of the experience.
So the genius of Jeff and the team was realizing that you cannot fight human nature.
You cannot beg players to go explore the beautiful world Chris Metzen drew if exploring isn't mathematically rewarding.
So they made the quests the path of least resistance.
They made it so that completing a narrative storyline yielded massively more experience points than just killing random monsters.
It's behavioral manipulation at its finest. If you want the dopamine hit of leveling up, you have to talk to the innkeeper, you have to travel to the next town, you have to cross the continent.
You think you are just being a ruthless optimizer, but the designers are secretly taking you on a beautifully curated cinematic world tour.
It completely changed the industry. It meant that for the first time, you could play an MMO entirely as a solo player.
You didn't have to wait 3 hours to form a group just to kill monsters. You could log in for 30 minutes, complete a quest, feel a sense of progression, and log out.
It widened the demographic appeal of the genre by an order of magnitude.
But they didn't master the psychology overnight.
No, which brings us to a spectacularly funny failure known as the Green Hills of Stranglethorn.
This is a perfect case study in what Jeff calls the ant farm designer syndrome.
So Jeff decides he wants to pay homage to his literary hero, Ernest Hemingway.
He designs a massive quest line in a jungle zone called Stranglethorn Vale.
He creates an NPC named Hemet Nessingwary, which is just an anagram for Ernest Hemingway.
The premise of the quest is that Hemet's manuscript has been blown away by the wind, and the pages are scattered across the jungle.
Sounds like a standard collection quest.
But Jeff, acting like a god looking down at an ant farm, decides to use this quest to force the social experiment.
He makes it so that the pages drop completely randomly for monsters.
You might kill a tiger and get 3 copies of Chapter 1, page 5, but you can't find page 6 anywhere.
Jeff's romantic vision was that players would be forced to use the game's chat system, talk to strangers, and organically trade pages with each other.
Fostering this beautiful cooperative community.
But the reality was an absolute nightmare.
Why? Because of user interface friction.
The physical inventory of a player in early WoW was tiny. Maybe you had a backpack with 16 slots.
Suddenly, a player is wandering through the jungle and their precious inventory space is completely clogged with random, unstackable pieces of paper that they can't get rid of.
It was infuriating. Players universally despised it. The friction was too high.
The lesson here is that you cannot puppeteer social interactions by introducing annoyance.
If you make something tedious, players will not hold hands and sing songs. They will simply bypass the friction entirely.
They went to the in-game auction house, spent their hard-earned virtual gold to just buy the missing pages from other players.
And spent the rest of their time cursing the designer who came up with the quest.
Jeff talks about how humbling that was.
But it also forged a culture where developers at Blizzard could look at their own work, admit it was terrible, and iterate without ego.
And it makes me think about our own lives right now. Look at the apps on your phone. Look at Instagram or TikTok or Amazon.
How often are the platforms we use every day designing a path of least resistance to manipulate our lizard brains?
Are we scrolling endlessly at 2 a.m. because we genuinely want to? Or because the interface designers removed every single point of friction, making the downward swipe the absolute easiest physical action your thumb can take?
It is a profound question of autonomy. Who is actually in control of the experience? The user or the architect?
Well, Blizzard's architecture worked. World of Warcraft launches in 2004, and it doesn't just succeed. It fundamentally alters pop culture.
It was featured on South Park. It had tens of millions of players.
But massive, world-altering success brings a much deadlier disease.
Hubris.
Which brings us to an $83 million disaster.
The initial launch of WoW was actually a period of deep anxiety for the team. The servers literally melted under the load of millions of players logging in simultaneously.
They were desperately scrambling to hire database engineers just to keep the world online.
From the inside, it felt like a disaster. They were reading toxic forum posts complaining about server lag, and they felt like they were failing their audience.
But then, in 2005, Blizzard decides to host their very first fan convention, BlizzCon.
They put the tickets up for sale via a simple link on the game's launcher. The tickets sell out almost instantaneously.
And when Jeff and the developers walk out onto that convention center floor in Anaheim, they are hit with a physical wall of sound.
Real human beings cheering, crying, shaking their hands, thanking them for creating this world.
It was a massive shock to the system.
It taught them a vital lesson about the internet. The hyper-cynical, aggressively toxic voices screaming on a forum do not represent the silent majority of people who are quietly enjoying the experience.
However, absorbing that wave of adoration had a dangerous side effect.
They went from being the insecure, scrappy bad news bears to feeling utterly invincible.
They started to believe their own mythology. We made WoW. We are untouchable. We can engineer anything.
But internally, corporate executives were terrified.
They looked at the history of games and assumed WoW would have a natural lifespan of maybe 5 years.
They believed they needed to cannibalize their own audience before a competitor did.
So they greenlit a successor, the MMO to end all MMOs. It was codenamed Project Titan.
The ambition of Project Titan is almost hard to articulate. It was set on a near-future sci-fi version of Earth.
The core concept was a duality of gameplay. By night, your character would be a highly lethal secret agent, engaging in fast-paced, Team Fortress-style first-person shooter combat.
Okay, that sounds awesome, but what do you do by day?
By day, you would have a completely mundane civilian job. You could be a mechanic, you could run a flower shop, you could build a house.
It was essentially trying to marry the ultra-violent, reflex-driven combat of a shooter with the slow, domestic simulation of games like The Sims or Animal Crossing. Wait, hold on. So I would log in, do a highly coordinated raid where I shoot terrorists with laser rifles for an hour, and then I would log off my combat shift to go water my digital petunias and balance the accounting book for my bakery.
That was the idea.
How were they possibly going to balance two entirely contradictory player bases in the same game?
The short answer is they couldn't, and they didn't. This was the catastrophic failure of Titan. We have to clearly delineate the difference between an idea and a vision.
Unpack that difference for me.
An idea is cheap. An idea is a sentence. Secret agents who run flower shops is an idea. Anyone can brainstorm that over a beer.
Right.
A vision, however, is the rigorous structural blueprint required to actually manifest that idea into reality.
A vision answers the hard questions. What is the art style? What does the game engine need to process? How do the combat mechanics interact with the economy?
Titan had endless sky-high ideas, but they never locked down a unified vision.
And because they lacked that vision, they committed a massive corporate sin anticipatory hiring.
Blizzard was printing money with WoW, so they had unlimited budget. They could recruit the absolute best talent on the planet.
In a single year, they hired 70 elite, world-class environmental artists.
They brought these people into the studio before the game designers even knew what the core gameplay loop was.
Which is the exact inverse of how game development should work.
You were supposed to keep the team incredibly small a handful of people in a room, and prove that the core mechanic is actually fun using gray boxes and stick figures.
You only scale up the art team when you absolutely know what you're building.
By bringing in 70 artists without a roadmap, the leadership panicked. They had to invent busy work just to keep them occupied.
Hey, we don't know how the game plays, but go design a highly detailed futuristic Chinatown. Hey, go spend 3 weeks modeling the perfect dumpster.
Exactly. And because there was no unified art direction, you ended up with assets that looked like they belonged to 10 completely different games.
But the real death blow was the technology. They decided to build a brand new, proprietary game engine entirely from scratch to handle this massive world.
They wanted to put everyone on one massive, continuous server.
They wanted a map that stretched from a fully modeled San Francisco to London, and you could seamlessly drive between them like in Grand Theft Auto.
But the engine couldn't handle it. The tools were so unstable that the pipeline completely broke down.
Think about it like this. If you are an artist, you need software to place a 3D building into the world. If that software crashes every 10 minutes, you cannot work.
The technical debt became so overwhelming that leadership actually told the programmers to stop submitting new code because it was breaking the build.
Jeff mentions a top-tier technical artist who meticulously logged his time. Out of a 40-hour workweek, the broken tools only allowed him to be productive for 20 hours.
So you have a scenario where you have the best artists in the world, the best programmers in the world, literally infinite financial resources, and 0 publisher deadlines.
And that is exactly why it failed. That is so counterintuitive. We are taught that money and talent solve everything.
It is the great paradox of the creative process. Absolute freedom is paralyzing.
If you have infinite money and infinite time, you never have to make a hard choice. You just say yes to every single feature.
But creativity requires constraints. A box forces you to think outside of it or to optimize what fits inside of it.
Titan had no box.
They spent 7 years and $83 million trying to build everything, and as a result, they achieved nothing.
In 2013, Blizzard executives finally walked into the room and pulled the plug. The MMO to end all MMOs was completely canceled.
I cannot imagine the psychological devastation of that.
You spend 7 years of your life working on something, and it just vanishes. 140 developers were scattered across the company to work on other projects.
But Jeff fought desperately to keep a tiny core remnant of the creative team together.
He essentially begged the CEO, Mike Morhaime, for one last chance.
And Morhaime gave them a brutal ultimatum. You have exactly 6 weeks to pitch a new game.
And the criteria for this pitch were almost insulting in their difficulty.
Morhaime said the game had to be completely shippable within 2 years, which, in AAA game development, is the blink of an eye.
And it had to have the potential to eventually generate World of Warcraft level revenue.
Jeff actually admits he just immediately ignored the revenue requirement.
He said predicting a billion-dollar hit is like predicting lightning is Monopoly money talk.
But he took the 2-year deadline incredibly seriously. He knew they had to pitch a concept that this traumatized, demoralized team of survivors could actually execute.
So over those 6 weeks, they broke the time down into 2-week sprints, developing 3 entirely distinct game pitches.
The first pitch was called StarCraft Frontiers.
It was set in the StarCraft universe, but instead of commanding massive armies from the sky, you played an MMO from the perspective of a lone, gritty space prospector on a frontier planet.
There was a legendary piece of concept art generated for this pitch by Arnold Sang and Peter Lee.
It showed a rugged space cowboy smoking a cigar, resting his boot on the skull of a dead alien Zerg.
It was incredibly evocative. That specific character design was so strong that it survived the cancellation of the pitch and eventually became the hero, McCree, now known as Cassidy, in Overwatch.
But Jeff looked at the scope of Frontiers. He realized that building a massive MMO with spaceships and multiple planets in 24 months was a delusion.
It was another Titan. It was an idea, not an executable vision.
So they moved to pitch number 2, Crossworlds.
This was the brainchild of Chris Metzen. The concept was a single planet sitting at the very edge of the known universe that served as a cosmic crossroads.
Think of the Mos Eisley Cantina in Star Wars, but as an entire game. Smugglers, bounty hunters, weird alien freaks from across the galaxy, all meeting in one place.
While they were fleshing out the mechanics for Crossworlds, they had a pedal design meeting regarding character classes.
In WoW, a class like a mage or a warrior has dozens and dozens of complex spells and abilities.
A designer in the room named Jeff Goodman, who was famous for designing the most mathematically complex raid bosses in WoW, spoke up with a radical idea.
He said, I wish instead of making 6 massive classes with 100 abilities each, we could just make 50 distinct classes that only have 1 or 2 really cool abilities.
And that single sentence changed the trajectory of the entire company.
Jeff hears that, goes back to his desk, and literally starts digging through the digital graveyard of Project Titan.
During Titan's development, they had designed a generic combat class called the Jumper.
The Jumper had dual pistols, the ability to teleport short distances, and a mechanic where they could rewind time to heal themselves.
Jeff takes that mechanical kit, walks over to the lead character artist, Arnold Sang, who had drawn a concept piece of a peppy British female pilot.
Jeff points at the drawing and asks, what if this isn't just a generic Jumper class? What if this is a specific named person? What if her name is Tracer?
And in that moment, the DNA of Overwatch is synthesized.
They abandon the idea of generic RPG avatars. Instead of playing a warrior, you play a highly specific, personality-driven hero with a deeply integrated backstory and a hyper-focused mechanical kit.
It was the birth of the hero shooter.
Jeff scrambles to put this pitch together for the executives. He creates what is now a notoriously ugly PowerPoint presentation.
He is not a graphic designer. It's just a default PowerPoint template with a gray background and standard blue shapes.
He titles the very first slide, Monetize Shooter, because in his mind he is trying to satisfy the executives' demand for revenue by proposing a free-to-play model where they sell cosmetics.
He literally just copy-pasted the logos for Team Fortress 2 and League of Legends onto the slide to show the inspirations.
It was a disaster of a deck.
Yeah.
A producer on the team looked at it and practically physically stopped him.
He told Jeff, you cannot walk into a room of Blizzard executives and present a game called Monetize Shooter. It violates every creative principle this company was founded on. You have to give it a real name.
And the story of how he named it Overwatch is so incredibly petty, and I love it.
During the dark days of Project Titan, a former leader on the team had decided they needed a new code name for the project.
He ran a quote-unquote democratic vote among the developers, but the leader completely rigged the process so that his own preferred name would win.
The name that the development team actually overwhelmingly voted for was Overwatch, but the leader ignored them.
So years later, Jeff takes that discarded name, slaps it onto the PowerPoint, and essentially uses it as a massive middle finger to the failed leadership of the past.
He was signaling to his traumatized team, this time I am actually listening to you.
They refined the pitch, they replaced the gray background with gorgeous concept art.
But to truly convince the executives that this wouldn't turn into another $83 million endless development cycle, they present a brilliant strategic roadmap called Crawl, Walk, Run.
Right. They diagnosed exactly why Titan died. Titan tried to sprint a marathon on day 1.
For Overwatch, the crawl phase was incredibly modest. They would build a tight, highly polished 6 versus 6 competitive multiplayer shooter.
No massive open world, no flower shops, just small arena maps to introduce the world to these incredible characters.
The walk phase, planned for years later, would introduce cooperative, narrative-driven player versus environment missions.
And finally, the run phase, the ultimate distant goal, would be expanding that universe into a full MMO.
They scoped the project down to its absolute molecular core.
And in a moment of pure corporate survival instinct, they knew that the executives at the time were obsessively chasing the mobile gaming market.
So Jeff admits he literally took an image of an iPad, pasted a PNG file of Tracer onto the screen, and confidently told the board, and by the way, it will also be fully playable on mobile.
It was complete smoke and mirrors. It's like realizing you have 2 years to build a massive skyscraper, knowing it's impossible, so you just build an absolutely breathtaking jewel box of a front lobby, and you assure the investors that the rest of the building is coming later.
And it worked. The board greenlit the project.
Because the Overwatch team fundamentally unlearned the bad habits of the Titan team.
Titan failed because it said yes to every idea. Overwatch succeeded because the team became ruthless at saying no.
They had constraints, they had a singular vision, and they executed it flawlessly.
Overwatch launches in 2016, and it is a supernova.
It wins Game of the Year, it generates over $1 billion in its first year, becomes a global cultural phenomenon.
But the fascinating part of this transcript is that once the game shipped, the nature of the job completely changed.
Jeff wasn't fighting a broken game engine anymore. He was fighting the psychological architecture of the human brain.
Designing the mechanics of a game is an engineering challenge. Maintaining a live, highly competitive ecosystem of millions of stressed human beings is a sociological nightmare.
And nowhere is that more evident than in the psychology of the matchmaking algorithm.
This segment of the transcript absolutely blew my mind. Jeff reveals that the matchmaking system in Overwatch is mathematically designed to keep every single player at exactly a 50% win rate.
Which sounds completely fair, right? If you go onto any gaming forum, the most common complaint you will read is players screaming, "The matchmaker is broken. I just want a fair match."
But Jeff points out that psychologically, players are lying to themselves.
When a human being asks for a fair match, what their ego is actually demanding is a match where they are slightly superior to the opponent.
They want the illusion of a struggle, but the ultimate guarantee of a victory to validate their skill.
A perfectly fair 50-50 match means you're going to lose half the time, and the human ego despises losing.
And our memory is completely corrupted by cognitive bias.
Jeff tells stories about investigating the accounts of players who are raging on the forums, writing these massive essays about how the matchmaker was artificially forcing them to lose because they just suffered a 6-game losing streak.
Jeff would pull up their server data, and he would see that immediately prior to those 6 losses, that exact same player had effortlessly cruised through an 8-game winning streak.
But the brain completely discards the winning streak. When we win 8 games in a row, we don't think, wow, the algorithm gave me easy opponents.
We think, wow, I am a tactical genius, I deserve this.
But the moment we lose 6 games, it becomes an existential threat to our identity. So we externalize the blame onto the machine.
The system is rigged against me. You cannot mathematically architect a zero-sum game where everyone feels like a winner, which inherently breeds frustration.
And that frustration leads to toxicity, which brings up one of Jeff's biggest retrospective regrets about how they designed Overwatch.
He admits he deeply regrets making the game too focused on teamwork.
It stems from a noble, but perhaps naive view of human nature. In traditional shooters like Call of Duty, you press a button and see a scoreboard that explicitly ranks every player by how many kills they have.
Jeff felt that bred a selfish, toxic environment. So for Overwatch, they intentionally hid individual statistics.
You couldn't see your teammates' kills or deaths. Instead, they implemented a medal system, gold, silver, bronze, to reward players for contributing to the team objective, like healing or blocking damage.
But humans are inherently ruthlessly selfish, especially when their ego is bruised by a loss.
If a team is losing, every single player on that team is desperately looking for evidence to prove that the loss is not their fault.
They completely weaponize the medal system.
A player playing a defensive character would look at their screen, see they had a gold medal for eliminations, and immediately get on the voice chat and start screaming at their team.
I have the gold medal. I am doing all the work. You are all garbage, and you are the reason we are losing.
And the tragic irony is that the gold medal might mean they had exactly 3 kills, while the silver medalist had 2.
It was a statistically meaningless difference, but it provided the perfect psychological ammunition for toxicity.
Jeff conceded that if he could build it again, he would design a system that massively highlighted individual moments of glory, because you simply cannot program the selfishness out of a competitive environment.
And speaking of environments changing, we have to talk about the Overwatch League, because this is where the organic fun of the game violently collides with the sterile demands of corporate monetization.
The initial concept of the Overwatch League was ambitious. Blizzard wanted to legitimize esports.
They wanted to elevate it from teenagers playing in hotel ballrooms to the level of the NFL or the NBA. City-based franchises, guaranteed minimum salaries for players, health benefits, proper infrastructure.
But to fund that, they sold franchise slots to traditional billionaire sports owners for tens of millions of dollars each.
And they signed massive, multi-year broadcasting rights deals with platforms like Twitch.
Suddenly, the entire developmental priority of the studio was hijacked.
The development team, whose only job should have been making the game fun for the millions of people playing it at home, was suddenly forced to serve the league.
Jeff talks about the sheer volume of work required just to support the broadcast.
They had to design home and away uniforms for every single character for 20 different teams and engineer a system to render those colors clearly for spectators.
And because their resources were tied up servicing the billionaires, the actual players suffered.
Early in Overwatch's life, they released an incredibly fun, silly summer event called Lucio Ball.
It was basically playing soccer with rocket-powered characters in a massive stadium. The community absolutely adored it. It was pure, unadulterated play.
But as the League took over, those organic, joyful events dried up. It is a textbook example of corporate monetization suffocating the creative soul of a project.
It raises the question of what players actually want from an online experience. Overwatch tried to engineer a highly polished, cooperative, theoretically positive environment, and it still struggled with toxicity.
But Jeff contrasts this by discussing a game he plays in his free time that represents the absolute polar opposite of Overwatch's design philosophy.
A game called Rust.
Rust sounds like a digital sociopath simulator.
It is a pure, unfiltered survival game. You wake up naked on a beach with a rock, you gather wood, you build a shack, you slowly accumulate weapons.
But there are no rules and there is no matchmaking. Any player can murder you at any time and take everything you have.
The mechanic that defines Rust is called offline raiding.
In Overwatch, when you turn off the game, you are safe. In Rust, your character and your base remain in the world even when you are logged off.
You could spend 80 hours meticulously gathering steel and concrete to build an impenetrable fortress. You log off to go to sleep in the real world.
At 3 a.m., a clan of rival players shows up to your virtual house with explosive charges.
They blow down your walls, they destroy your respawn bed, and they steal every single piece of loot you have spent a month gathering.
When you wake up and log back in, you are naked on the beach again with nothing.
That sounds like literal psychological torture. Why on earth would anyone subject themselves to that?
Because of the principle of emotional contrast. Jeff explains that human beings crave intensity.
You cannot experience the euphoric adrenaline-pumping high highs without the legitimate threat of debilitating low lows.
In Rust, the thrill of successfully defending your base against an attack or the transgressive rush of sneaking into someone else's base and stealing their loot is intoxicating precisely because the risk of total loss is so severe.
It taps into a primal, almost tribal psychology that highly regulated, sanitized games like Overwatch simply cannot replicate.
It's the Wild West all over again. But there is a dark side to unleashing that primal negativity, and it spills out of the game world and into reality.
This brings us to the final, and perhaps most sobering lesson of this deep dive, the human cost of online toxicity.
Jeff addresses a tragic reality of the modern internet era, and he points to a specific colleague to illustrate it. He talks about Jay Wilson, who was the game director for Diablo 3.
Commercially, Diablo 3 was an astronomical success. It sold tens of millions of copies.
But the game had a controversial launch. There were server errors and controversial design choices regarding an in-game auction house.
And the internet, as it does, decided that Jay Wilson was the villain.
The vitriol directed at him was not just criticism of the game mechanics. It was relentless, concentrated, highly personal hatred.
Death threats, coordinated harassment, character assassination across every social media platform.
And despite the massive financial success of the game, the psychological toll of absorbing that much pure hatred broke him.
Jay Wilson eventually resigned and left the video game industry entirely.
Jeff refers to this dynamic as a form of social Darwinism for modern creators.
Think about the implications of that. The barrier to entry to share your art with the world is lower than ever.
But the psychological armor required to survive the reaction is practically superhuman.
We are potentially losing the modern-day equivalents of Beethoven or Van Gogh or Hemingway, not because they lack talent, but because they simply cannot withstand the global fire hose of internet vitriol.
It is an architectural flaw in how we have built the modern internet. Social media algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, and they have learned that the fastest way to generate engagement is through hyperbole and outrage.
There is absolutely no algorithmic incentive for nuance.
If I go on Twitter and say, hey, I bought this new coffee mug, the handle is a little small, but the ceramic is nice, I give it a 7 out of 10, absolutely no one is going to retweet that.
Exactly. To gain traction, you are forced to adopt extreme polarities.
You either have to scream, this coffee mug is a flawless gift from the gods, and if you disagree, you are an idiot.
Or you have to scream, this coffee mug is a crime against humanity and the person who designed it should be fired.
We have constructed an entire digital ecosystem that actively disincentivizes measured, rational appreciation and heavily subsidizes cruelty.
So the internet basically forces us to either worship a creator as a deity or demand their execution.
There's no room for, I like this, but it has flaws anymore.
It makes you wonder how many brilliant games, how many incredible novels or breathtaking movies we will never, ever get to experience simply because the creators were shouted out of the public square before their talent could fully mature.
It represents a massive, invisible cultural loss. And overcoming it requires a conscious, deliberate effort from the community.
It requires the vulnerability to stand up in a cynical space and simply say, I genuinely love this, without hiding behind a shield of irony.
All right, we have covered an absolutely staggering amount of ground today.
We started with a guy sitting alone in an apartment with a dog named Kerouac and a bottle of whiskey, reading 170 rejection letters and throwing his life's dream into a literal dumpster.
We explored how a 6,000-hour obsession with a digital world led to him accidentally interviewing for a job with a CEO playing an anonymous troll.
We analyzed the panicked realization that human beings are too inherently lazy to read quests unless it is mathematically optimal.
We watched an $83 million vision collapse under the weight of its own hubris.
And we witnessed the desperate, beautiful pivot to Overwatch, built by a team that finally learned the creative power of saying no.
It serves as a masterclass not just in game design, but in resilience.
It shows us the absolute necessity of constraints in the creative process, the danger of unchecked ambition, and the deep, often contradictory psychological drivers that compel us to interact, compete, and play.
I want to leave you with a final thought, building heavily on the concept we discussed during the birth of World of Warcraft, the path of least resistance.
We talked about how genius-level game designers expertly craft digital environments to secretly guide your behavior.
They don't force you, they just make the action they want you to take the absolute easiest action for you to take.
I want you to look around your own life right now. Look at your physical environment. Look at the layout of the apps in your phone. Look at your daily routines.
What is your personal path of least resistance currently leading you toward?
Are you acting as the active designer of your own life, purposefully placing the friction and the quests where you want to go?
Or are you just an NPC, mindlessly walking down a path that some algorithm or some app developer in Irvine secretly built for you?
A vital, deeply necessary question to carry forward into your week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Keep questioning the hidden mechanics behind the worlds you live in, both digital and physical.
We will see you next time.